we want to do is to catch up and help you with the approval system for the NHS ethical approval and give you as much information as we can to the update of what's happening. Just a little reminder that this is for NHS ethical approval and it's nothing to do with the university's systems of ethical approval. So unfortunately they won't be able to answer any questions about that system. So I will leave you over to Jessica.
Good morning everyone. So can everybody hear me? Or am I don't know. So what I'm going to do, the first presentation I'm going to give is purely on ethics, and then what we're going to do after that is I'm going to show you a brief presentation on HRA approval. Unfortunately, a member of the team couldn't come today and do the presentation themselves, so what I am happy to do is do a short presentation on it, and then if anybody has any questions, take them away with me, and I'll contact you with the answers or get somebody from the approvals team to let you know what those are. So the role of the Research Ethics Service is protecting the rights, safety, dignity and well-being of research participants and facilitating ethical research. So that's our mission statement right on the website. So our governance arrangements for research ethics committees, known to us as GAFREC, our remit covers potential research participants identified from or because of their past or present use of the NHS. Potential research participants identified because of their status as relatives or carers of past or present users of the NHS. And also collection of tissue, so that's any material consisting of or including human cells or information from users of the NHS, and use of previously collected tissue or information from which individuals past or present users of the NHS could be identified. So that's the remit that we cover. So the topics I'm going to do to cover today is I'm going to briefly cover IRAS. I'll cover submitting an application, what the REC actually look at, briefly proportionate review, and then I'm happy to take the group work off, which is just basically some sort of scenarios, which is more for proportionate review, looking at whether they are suitable for proportionate review. So I don't know if that will be relevant for any of you, but we can always take that off if you're not interested. So tips on preparing the documentation to submit into a REC. The patient information sheet and consent form, so they need to be in our standard format. So there is a lot of guidance on the HRA website in terms of the headings that we're looking for to be included and the information that should be contained in those headings. So I would have a look at the guidance that is on the website when preparing your information sheets and consent forms and wondering whether they're in this sort of relevant standards for us. Another tip there is to, if you're using your study population out there is children and you've got age ranges from 6 to 16, making sure that you've got relevant information sheets for different groups of the ages, so I don't know, 6 to 10, breaking it down, making sure that the information in those information sheets is going to be understandable for that age group. Another thing that the ethics committees like sometimes for children's studies is, the use of images in there to sort of explain what you're saying. So there are things to think about when you're using children, but also in any other population that you have, making sure that the information is going to be relevant to that target. Again, if you are involving children, ensuring that you submit assent forms and not consent forms. So making sure that you've got assent forms for the particular ages, also that there's information for the parents and guardians and separate consent forms for those. If your study is based on administering questionnaires, or you're going to be doing interviews or focus groups, making sure that when you submit your application that you are submitting copies of the questionnaires and the interview schedules. And if sometimes when you submit a study initially, you don't quite know what the whole interview schedule might look like in terms of all of the questions that you might ask. But a range of those is what the committee would want to look at. They can't approve something that if they don't know what you're going to be asking participants. So even if you don't have it set in stone, just some idea so that you can give the ethics committee an idea of what you're going to be asking. Advertisements, so if you're going to be putting posters up, I don't know, in wards or in universities, all copies of those that you're going to, or if, I know nowadays they use Twitter or Facebook to advertise and try and recruit participants. Again, if you can send copies of those materials as well as with your submission, just so that the committee can look at the content of what you're asking, you know, what the wording is, how you're asking them to take part in the study. And this is quite a big one, that document control, making sure that all of your, I would say, participant-facing documents have version numbers on them and dates, because otherwise we will ask you to put those on them. So your protocol, information sheet, consent forms, GP letters, questionnaires, everything like that needs to have a version number and date on. I don't know whether this will be relevant, but if you're going to intend in using, including adults who lack capacity in your study, making sure that you've got the correct documents, so the consultee or legal representative documents, that's what we'll be looking for. And we'll be looking for the correct terminology as well, for those types of studies, whether it's a CTIMP or whether it's another study. And if you're doing a CTIMP study, making sure that you're submitting the investigators' brochures, the SNPCs, they need to be submitted. If you don't send them at the time, you send them to the REC for validation, we will ask you to send those. And if it's a medical device study, making sure that you're submitting the device manuals. And I will say that that's probably, whether it's a CE mark device or not, always submit the manual if you're doing a device study. Again, this might not be relevant, but we put it on because it's something that we see a lot of. But if your study's going to include ionising radiation, then what you need to do is in the IRAS form, you need to select yes to question 2B. If you don't select yes at that part, it won't populate any of the relevant sections in the form. So you need to do that right at the beginning of the filter, project filter page, and then it will populate the relevant sections. Again, it will populate part B, which will need to be completed, and then it will also populate sections for your medical physics expert and lead clinical radiation expert to sign off, and that's part C, I think, that's where that will populate. And it must be included in the patient information sheet, the risk of the ionising radiation, it needs to be included in there. So they're just tips on completing the IRAS form. So complete the filter page and the IRAS form fully, make sure that you've got the correct authorisations, your checklist and supporting documents are uploaded, and then now through the IRAS system you need to resubmit it. So for those of you who've already completed an IRAS form, this is what it looks like, the first page. So, I mean, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the whole IRAS form because it's pretty huge, as some of you might know. But as I said, I would always make sure that you're getting the right information in the project filter first of all, because as I said, that will determine all of the questions that it populates. And if you do one thing wrong in the beginning, you're going to start filling out things that maybe you don't need to do along the way. So just as you can see there where you put your study title, and these little green icons are really helpful if you're unsure about what you are. If it's the first time you're completing an IRAS, it would probably take a long time, but I would probably look at all of these eye icons just to make sure that you're ticking the right things correct, or if you're unsure, they do give quite useful information. So I know it does take a long time completing it, but doing it thorough is going to help you in the long run. And again, these are just other little sections. So there is the two-way section covers about tissue. So if you're going to be collecting tissue or taking tissue samples at any point, make sure you're looking at that section. And the ionising radiation, as I mentioned earlier, is that 2B there section. So just make sure that you're ticking the correct things. And if you're including adults who are going to lack capacity, you need to select yes to question 7. Research involving prisoners, which you may or may not do, that's question 8, and question 9 is for student projects. So make sure that you're ticking there that it is for an educational project. So submitting an application for review. So what happens at the Research Ethics Committees? So the application that you send to us, and once it's validated, is sent to 2 weeks prior to the actual meeting date. The members of the committee consist of volunteers who are lay and expert members. The meeting has to be quorate to be able to go ahead, so that means that we allow no less than 7 members present at that meeting. And various recs are specialised in reviewing certain types of studies, because they have that specific expertise. So certain committees are flagged for reviewing adults who lack capacity studies, CTIMS, children's studies, research tissue banks, research databases. So when you're booking it in initially with CBS, make sure that you are getting it reviewed at an appropriate committee. You don't want it going there and then they're not actually, flagged to review that type of study. And then at the actual meeting there'll be a pre-discussion about the study, and then if there is an applicant who can attend, somebody either from the sponsor representative or maybe the CI or the student themselves, then they'll bring them in, have a conversation with them, and then once the applicant has left, make a decision about the study. And then you'll receive a decision letter within 10 working days about that outcome. So the decisions that are available for studies are favourable opinion, so that means you can, there's no changes required and you can start straight away. There's favourable with conditions, so you can technically start the study, but there may be a few specific things that the REC have asked for, and they're usually minor things that have asked, so maybe, typo errors in certain documents, or it would never be anything that requires confirmation or clarification or anything like that. Provisional opinion, so the study can't commence at that time, but there's certain questions that the committee have, and maybe if you answer those, then you can start the study. And then an unfavourable opinion, which is when they think that there is serious ethical concerns and that you need to resubmit, which I don't think happens that often across the board for our office. Usually it's if a study maybe is of poor quality as well, maybe it's not been put together very well, that it just throughout the whole of the documentation there's been issues. So the timelines of the application, so we kind of touched on it then, I think Linda did, but full application, we have 5 days to validate it in our office, and then once it's valid, it's given a 60-day clock. And for PR studies, we are given 2 calendar days to validate those, and then they work to a 14-day clock. So booking in an application, I touched on that earlier, so making sure they've got electronic authorisations, contacting the central booking system by telephone. What the CBS booking colleagues do is they go through a series of questions, which is a pathway. So making sure that you answer those questions correctly, and it would depend on which rep then you are allocated for your review, so just make sure that you answer those correctly. Once the study is booked in, we do need to receive it within 24 hours. So you need to make sure that really at the time that you're booking it, that you've got everything sorted out, all your documents are ready, you've got your authorisation, so it's just literally click of a button for you to do, not thinking, I'll try and do this once I've booked it in, because we can withdraw it if it's not received within 24 hours. And just to let you know that hard copies of studies are no longer available, which is great for us, because we used to get millions of big stacks of paper. So it's all through e-submission now. So what the REC actually look at. So there's 10 ethical domains that the committee consider when reviewing any type of study. So it's the social or scientific value, recruitment arrangements and access to health information, the risk-benefit ratio to participants, care and protection of research participants, the informed consent process and the adequacy and the completeness of the PIS and the consent form, the suitability of the applicant and supporting staff, independent reviews, suitability of supporting information, other general comments, and then they consider the suitability of the summary of the study, which is A6-1 section of the IRAS form. So I'm going to go into a little bit more information about these, because this is what the committee is going to consider every time they review a study. So what I'm going to do is give you a few examples about each of these sections so that you can incorporate this and make sure that this is in your IRAS form. So for the social and scientific value, they're going to be looking at the evaluation of a treatment or an intervention or theory that will improve health and well-being or increase knowledge. And what they will also look at is the research design and proposed statistical analysis able to answer the question. So in terms of their research participant selection, they're going to look at the benefits and the risks of the research, whether they're distributed fairly among all social groups and classes, taking particular account of age, disability, gender and race. So, and also are compensation arrangements in place, so the insurance for the study is their negligent and non-negligent harm insurance cover there. In terms of the favourable risk benefit ratio, they're looking at the benefits, the risks, are they clearly identified for the research participant? Is the balance between the risk and the benefit equitable? The care and protection of research participants. The committee are going to be looking at maintaining the welfare of participants in the study, and also the data protection and research participants' confidentiality. So where and how data will be anonymised and if it's coded, and for how long that data will be stored. So make sure as well that that's consistent throughout all of your documentation. We do find it at times that it will say 3 years in the application form, but then in your protocol it will say that it's going to be stored for 5 years. So just make sure that all of the information is consistent, and also that it adheres to whether you're part of a trust, that it adheres to their policies, their internal data protection policies, etc. Make sure that you get that looked into before including that information in your documents. And the informed consent process. So the committee looked at, is the language used clear and understandable to the participant population? So that goes back to me saying if you're going to involve children, making sure that, children of the age of 6 to 10, if that's the group that you're going to be looking at, are going to be able to understand it. Does it include all the procedures described in the protocol, making sure that nothing's missed out? If there's an MRI in the protocol but you've not put that in the information sheet, so making sure that all of the actual things that the participants are going to have to be doing is included and set out in the information sheet. And do participants have adequate time to consider the information, and do they have the opportunity to ask questions? And the suitability of the applicant and supporting staff. So are the applicant and supporting staff suitably qualified and have experience relevant to the proposed research? And medical research involving human subjects must be conducted only by individuals with appropriate scientific training and qualifications. So they will look at your CVs and the academic supervisor CVs and make sure that everything looks credible, but it's what they have to do. So in terms of the independent review, they will review the design of the research trial, its proposed research participant population, and the risk-benefit ratio by individuals who are unaffiliated with the research. So in terms of the suitability of the supporting information, so they're going to be looking at all the patient-facing documents, so the GP letters, interview schedules, questionnaires, loan working policies as well. If you're going to be doing anything that's off-site or in a patient's home, make sure that you do submit evidence of that you have got a loan working policy. And then other general comments, that heading, they're going to look for typos, which I know is quite pedantic, but they do. You have certain members that's all that they will look at for their entire review, but that's why we have those type of members on the committee. It's annoying, but it's helpful. So, and then the last heading, as I said, that's section A61. So they will look at the suitability of this summary of the study, because they are starting to be published on the HRA website. So they'll look at whether that's adequate, because once it comes to us publishing it, whatever you've put in A61 will be transferred over.
In the public domain.
So making sure that that's just not one sentence and you've got enough information in there. So now going on to proportionate review. So as I was saying earlier, it's for research studies that present no material ethical issues. So in terms of them being presenting less risk, burden or intrusion to the participants, and studies that are reviewed and approved by a proportionate review subcommittee are done within 14 days, which we touched on earlier. So it isn't a full committee review as well. So as we were saying earlier, that can be up to 18 members. A proportionate review study will be reviewed by a minimum of three members. So, and they can be done virtually now, so it can be done just by correspondence. So it's a different type of review. But another big thing for proportionate review is you're not asked to attend the meeting, so you can't attend the meetings. But you may be contacted 2 days prior to the actual meeting date, and that could be by the lead reviewer or the chair of that committee, maybe to ask you a few questions or for clarification. But again, not all PR subcommittees do that, so it's not across the board. It will depend on that, whether they want to ask you the questions. So it is a different type of review. So the decisions that are available to PR studies are all the same as what I had on my previous slide, apart from the additional of no opinion. So that's if it meets our validation criteria, but it goes to the subcommittee and they do feel that it's not suitable for PR, then it can be given a no opinion and it will be transferred to a full committee, and then it will be reviewed by a full committee, which will then have the 60-day clock. So So when we're looking at the suitability of a study that's come in and has identified itself as being suitable for PR, we're looking to make sure that it fits into one of these categories here. So just to sort of say for the first one, the research using data on tissue that is anonymous to the researcher, we do get it a lot where people select it as that, and the actual research team themselves are anonymising the data. That isn't suitable for PR. It has to be already anonymised before the research team get it. So that's something to remember. We do get that all the time, that we have to make it unsuitable for PR because the research team themselves are not anonymising it. They have to receive it anonymised. Studies using existing tissue samples already taken with consent for research can be suitable for PR. Studies using surplus or extra tissue with consent. Questionnaire studies that do not include highly sensitive areas, and that's again the same for interview or focus group studies. Research surveying the safety or efficacy of established non-drug treatments involve limited intervention or no change to a patient's treatment. Minimally invasive basic science studies involving healthy volunteers, and then there's the category which is any other study, but it would usually fall into one of the others. It may be that it falls into one of the others plus the last category there. And there's some studies that always require full review. So they're CETIN studies, clinical investigations of medical devices prior to CE marking, research involving adults who lack capacity, research involving exposure to ionizing radiation, tissue banks, research databases, research involving prisoners, and studies funded by the US Department for Health and Human Services. So they will always need to go for full review. They will never be suitable for PR. So the HRA approval, so this is just sort of a diagram to show you how it will work. So the application is received, there will be the REC validation which we will do, and then the HRA approval team will look at have an initial assessment. Once we send it to the members to be reviewed, that initial assessment will go with our validation letter and will be considered by the REC members. And at the same time as the REC review, the HRA assessment will happen. And then once it's been given so this is based on a study being given favourable opinion, then what will happen is there'll be a collation of the approvals from both the REC and the HRA approval, and then you'll have one approval which will be called HRA approval. So that will be combined of the REC opinion letter as well as the approvals opinion letter, but you will get it at one time. So that's what this is the streamline of what HRA approval is going to be. As I said, it's not suitable for all types of studies at the minute, but there is a lot of information on the HRA website as to, because what's happening is it's being done in certain cohorts, and it's being rolled out as certain cohorts, and I know that student research is going to be the very last one, and I know that's not going to be until beginning of next year. I think that they're going to actually roll that cohort out. So it is done in different phases, because they wanted to make sure that if there's anything along the way that they can sort of refine it. So it's kind of the R&D departments, that function is going to be done by the HRA approval. So R&Ds will still exist, but their purpose will be a different role. It will probably be more of a support role for, I don't know, the people within that trust, whereas HR approval is going to take on, like Linda mentioned earlier, all the legality stuff, the stuff that R&D used to look at. So things like, is the site got all of the equipment, I don't know, all of the necessary things in place for you to be able to conduct that study there. It will look at funding. But there is a lot of information on the HRA website, as I said, on the approval side of it. So the HRA assessment criteria and standards, what will be assessed and the expected standards. So there's a single review of legality and compliance, and it looks at the sports study setup. So the application package for the HRA approval, so it's a combined REC and R&D form, so as I said earlier, it will be one form now instead of completing two. It's a combined checklist of documents, so it combines existing document requirements in one package. So those that you send to the REC, it will all be done on one checklist now. So we do get to the REC stuff that's probably only relevant for HRA approval, but we do submit that to the members. So there's no longer submitting different documents to different various bodies. It will just be done through one way. And for the purposes of HRA approval, if your study is suitable for HRA approval, if you can please include the IRAS ID on all of your patient-facing documents, so patient information sheet, consent form, GP letter, because it's easy for the HRA approval to identify it that way through the IRAS ID. So applying to the HRA, there's one set of authorisations, one set of documents to upload, and for all studies included non-rec, contact the central booking service. So a little bit about amendments. So submitting amendments. Amendments requiring rec approval, continue to submit them to the rec, so send them to us. Information will be shared internally to the HRA assessment team. Amendments not requiring rec approval, so non-substantial minor amendments, submit to HRA approval. So there is no longer a need for the rec to acknowledge a minor amendment and no need for you to submit them to us. And the sponsor is still responsible for determining whether an amendment is substantial or non-substantial. So we might give you advice as to whether we think it is non or it is substantial, but ultimately that decision lies with the sponsor, so we will go with whatever decision that they make. And these are just some useful links. Again, I can get this presentation sent out to you all, so you can have a look at those.